thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to be talking about how you can put your garden to bed over the fall season. Um, this, okay. General cleanup of debris. This is the start for just about anything that you're going to do. When you're cleaning up out your flower beds and your vegetable gardens, you want to pull plants that are not healthy and throw those in the trash or in the city compost. Don't put anything in your compost that is diseased. You also want to just discard weeds. By discard, I mean putting those in the trash if those weeds have seeds. If they don't, you can put them in compost. They'll be fine. Okay, adding mulch to your garden. Why do you want to mulch your garden? It is a great way to reduce evaporation. Mulch will inhibit weeds, preventing them from growing as quickly or as fully. It adds organic mulch over time. If you use thick, large materials, you want to apply 4 to 6 inches. And if you use thick, smaller materials, 3 to 4 inches is good. During the growing season, once you put the mulch down, you want to pull it away from the plants a little bit, which is called side dressing. These bark chunks and pole shavings are not good for perennials and vegetable gardens. They prevent they don't decompose as quickly, so they're not great for those types of beds. If you want to set up winter interest, you can put out things like bird feeders. You can keep some seed heads growing or in your garden of plants that are spent. You can keep your ornamental grasses growing, and you can plant bulbs so that you are ready for the spring. In perennial gardens, you want to cut back your plants thoughtfully and carefully, if you cut them back at all. It's a good idea to leave some for winter interest just because it really looks good in the winter time with the seed heads and so forth. But it's good for birds and different insects. They use these to overwinter a lot of times. And we will discuss this more in the Q&A section from the pre-selected questions, how far to cut things back and when to cut them back, and if you even need to cut them back. But basically, if you cut perennials back in the fall, it exposes the stems to drying winds that can accelerate winter kill, which you don't want. And it varies by the type of plant, what I was just talking about. Pruning is a whole nother topic. So the thing I really want you to take away from this, there are 3 types. There's renewal, rejuvenation, and remedial. I will mention that remedial is going to be the best thing for you to take away from this class. That is removing broken, dead, or diseased branches. And you can do that any time of the year. More about cutting back. If you decide not to cut back, which is great, you are providing nests for overwintering pollinators like solitary bees who don't build hives. They often hide in the plant stems. You are providing seeds for some birds and small animals. It's visually interesting. There's a risk of overwintered plant diseases, and it can look messy. Those are the downsides. You should, if you're going to cut back, just kind of hedge your bets. Cut some perennials back to the ground after they die and leave some others. Leave your ornamental grasses and seed heads of certain flowers for texture and food for birds, and only leave plants standing that are healthy. If they're diseased, I can't emphasize that enough, get rid of them. For bulbs, corms, and tuberous roots, this is just general information. You want to dig and store tender summer flowering bulbs and corms after frost has nipped the foliage and leaves are blackened. Dig them out carefully, because if you nick them, that's entry point for disease, and you may need to remove them because they will get sick. Clip off and destroy the plant tops right away. let the bulbs dry for a few days, and then store them in a cool, dry area. Just an interesting note that dahlias sometimes will overwinter here in Colorado. You can treat them as annuals, but it depends on the microclimates in your garden. If you get excessive winds and things like that, they may not make it. But if you have them in a protected place, they could come back. Nice surprise. If you're going to dig up your bulbs, you want to check for insects and diseases before you store them. You can dust the bulbs with an insecticide fungicide mixture that is labeled as a preventive. Label your plant materials because those bulbs all start to look alike after a while. Store them between 2 and 3 inches of peat moss, sand, vermiculite, things like that. Don't store in an airtight container because that may make them rot. You want to store them at about 35 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit and a relative humidity of 50%. Do check on the bulbs during the winter, and if you see that they're dehydrated, just lightly moisten the layering media, which are any of those things that we just talked about, peat moss, sand, and so forth, with a little bit of water. Vegetable gardens, moving right along. Some crops that you grow or want to grow are frost tolerant. These are plants that can handle fall frost with no problems until the temperature dips below about 28 degrees for an extended period. Light frost will often enhance the flavor of some of these crops. And you can see the whole list up here of ones that withstand light frost, like artichokes, beets, bok choy, carrots, and so forth. Things that are likely damaged by light frost are beans, cucumbers, tomatoes, sweet corn, the plants of winter squash, summer squash, all the things you probably would expect. And these are all frequently grown crops here in Colorado. Things that can take a hard frost are broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbages, parsley, peas, radishes. You can put potatoes, if you're growing potatoes, they can stay in the ground as long as the soil doesn't freeze, even though that foliage dies back. But you do want to pull them before the soil freezes, or you can mulch them really heavily and keep, extending that. Just make sure the ground doesn't freeze, or no potatoes. Just harvest what needs to be harvested starting now if you've got things that can be harvested. To accelerate harvest, you can cut water back or off crops to speed the ripening. Some vegetables can be left in the garden longer. If you see that picture of the tomatoes, you want to harvest those as you can, and those are one of the fruits that are vegetables that benefit from cutting the water back or off to crops to make them speed up their ripening. It works. Harvesting winter squash. You can cut back water to that over a period of a few weeks because you don't want to totally interrupt the growth. Pluck blossoms from the plant. I think, harvesting, let me just tell you about harvesting when it's ready. When the skin toughens and you can't dent the skin by pressure from your fingernail, it's time to harvest then. Carrots and other root crops. You can clip the tops to store your carrots and other root crops at 33 degrees with high humidity. You want to mulch the carrots so that you can pull them fresh from the garden in the winter. You hill a foot of straw, that's right, 12 inches of straw over those carrot shoulders, which is the part that shows above the soil after the ground cools. And then you can dig and store them before the ground freezes. Mulch for root crops. Many root crops can stay in the ground and under a really thick blanket of mulch, like I mentioned before. Just before you add it, wait until the soil cools, and then there's the 12-inch layer of weed-free mulch. These are vegetables that do well in garden storage, like beets, cabbage, celery, and so forth. Ways to speed up tomato ripening. You can thin the plants by snipping off blossoms and young fruit. I mean, tiny fruit that is not possibly going to mature on its own before the season ends. You want to leave all that energy for full grown tomatoes, and that will force it to happen when you pull off those blossoms and so forth. New shoots and overloads of mature tomatoes can also slow ripen. So if they're in a place where you can pluck them and ripen them on the counter, that's best. Cut back your water to the plants, as I mentioned before, to hasten the vine ripening. Pull the plant. This is one way that you can hasten ripening. It doesn't always work that well in Colorado because it's very dry here and it can be really messy. So if you're going to try it, make sure you cover your floor and wherever you're going to hang the plants upside down. You can pick green tomatoes for storage from healthy vines or pink ones that will ripen on the counter. You want to prevent problems from rot, so harvest the plants when they're dry. Don't pick fruits that are diseased or have too much insect damage, if any at all. Clip the tomatoes from the vine, or you can use what they call the knuckle. You can see that on the tomatoes in this picture. It's where that little bulge is on the plant, and they can just snap off at the knuckle. Breakers are what happens when your tomato starts to color at the blossom end. It's going to continue to ripen for you on your counter at that stage. And they taste pretty close to vine ripened. I find it's hard to tell the difference. Pinks are those that are colored up that are not fully ripe, and they will continue to ripen on your counter as well. If you have mature green tomatoes, and they've actually started some color when they're mature and green, those are the ones that are fully sized and they're glossy, light green and whitish. If you have dark green tomatoes, they're just solid green, that kind of icky green pale. But they're great for fried green tomatoes, or you can put them in relishes or stew them. More on garden cleanup. Remove and compost healthy plant matter, healthy being the operative word, and remove plants that have allelopathic leaves. That's just a way for plants to protect themselves in the garden. I won't go into too much of that. You want to add compost, manure, or other organic amendments to your garden. If you're using a manure, don't put it on in the spring. Don't wait for the spring. Put it in the fall, because you can get these are things that can cause E. coli, and that will leave. Putting them on in the fall allows the time for the manure to compost into the soil. If you have finished compost, you can put that in at any time. These are just examples of what the organic amendments are. They're biosolids, manure, straws, different types of compost, worm castings if you want to try vermiculture. This is the recommended organic amendment rate. This will be, of course, included in the slide package, and it goes into how deeply you need to put in the compost that you're working with, and how to convert it, how much you need for 1,000 square feet. The recommended organic amendment rate, your goal is to gradually increase the soil organic matter to about 5% and then maintain it at about 5%. If your organic material is low, the first 2 years go above the minimums. If you can cut the rates in half in subsequent years and discontinue routine annual applications once that organic material is achieved. The way that you will know if you've got enough organic material is by having a soil test, and that will be discussed during the Q&A. The benefits of mulches and cover crops. These make it difficult for weed seeds to germinate or even survive as seedlings, especially the deeper it is. It's just going to be a tough fight for them. It will reduce evaporation from the soil surface and cut water use by 25 to 50%. The organic mulches improve soil tilth, which is just the construction of the soil, and help lessen soil compaction, which makes the soil bind together and get hard. It stabilizes the soil moisture. It prevents soil compaction, as just mentioned, and it can moderate soil temperature extremes. And it gives your garden a nice look. Some types of organic mulches, as you can see here, bark chips, ground corn cobs, all kinds of cool things, leaves, newspaper, straw, make sure it's weed free. It can be used, as we discussed a little earlier, to keep root crops in the ground, preserve moisture, prevent erosion. And in the spring, organic mulches can be tilled into the soil. If you're using plant material, only do that if it's healthy, if the plant is healthy. Grass clippings can make a very good mulch when you put them in or on the ground in very thin layers and allow them to dry between applications. Then you add additional layers each week that the lawn is mowed. There's nothing inherently wrong if you just pile it on, but you want to get it dry because this will get moldy and it's unpleasant to look at and it's unpleasant to smell. So it's a good idea to apply it just as directed here. Just a few layers can help prevent weed seed germination. The grass clippings will decompose rapidly, and you can keep applying the grass clippings during the growing season, and they recycle into nutrients into the garden bed. Well, word of warning, and that's why this is in red, don't use grass clippings from lawns that have been treated with herbicides or other pesticides for at least 4 weeks after that herbicide is applied. And it may be longer depending on the herbicide. A good wood mulch can look really great between your crops if you have a garden bed like this where everything's neatly put in rows and a structure, but not in the bed. Straw as mulch is great if it's clean. So you need to know your source basically when you're buying straw for your garden. It can be weedy, so just make sure you check to see. The higher the percentage of weed-free, the better it is. It can result in nitrogen deficiency, but you can combat that by finding out via a soil test what nitrogen needs you have. Be careful of herbicide contamination. That's knowing your source as well. Make sure that the person that's selling it to you isn't growing it and protecting it with herbicides. It can be thrown around by the wind. It can be messy, but overall, it's a really good mulch. That's what I use in my garden. And I find it's been very successful, but that could be different for different people. You can also put newspapers under mulch. The newspaper will block the light and it makes the germinating weed seeds really tough. The newspaper should be applied just 1 to 2 sheets thick, and then you top those with wood bark chips or grass to hold it in place. Remaining newspaper can be cultivated into the soil in the fall, but you want to be sure that you use newspapers that are printed with soy-based inks. More about compost manure and organic amendments. Turn your soil once per year for soil microbe health. You may want to wait until spring to till if you're using a cover crop. And cover crops, you generally turn those into the soil in the spring a couple of weeks before you're ready to plant. If you use finished compost, you can apply that anytime. And again, manures in the fall only. I think we went that. There's an extra slide for different reasons for organic amendments. The primary reasons are that organic matter improves the physical properties of the soil with structure and aggregation, which is how the soil is clumped together. Water infiltration, aeration, and nutrient and water holding capacities. It is Problems with adding organic amendments. Yes, there are. Organic doesn't mean it's foolproof. Many of the purchased products for organic amendments have high salt content because they have a high fertilizer content. So you need to check the packaging and make sure, compare the different types that are available and make sure you don't get one that's high in salt. The quantity and the quality of added compost does matter. You want to determine whether adding the compost improves or degrades your soil health. So, because too much of a good thing ceases to be a good thing, again, soil testing. They are not all created equally. They are highly variable in the quality of the different compost, even with the same brand and a different lot. So you can avoid all that. And we're not going to go into anything about composting other than what is right here. If that comes up as a question during the Q&A, that's great. But the way to make sure that you're getting the best possible compost for your needs is to make your own. That way you can control the input, meaning you have higher quality. It's fresher, it's standard thermal composting, there's sheet composting and vermicomposting, which is worms. Other recommendations are that when you buy a topsoil mix for raised beds, don't exceed 20 to 25% compost to soil. Because high amounts of compost in the mix can result in high salinity, which is what I talked about earlier. Some composts are high in salt, and salinity is very harmful to plants. Harmful to humans, it's definitely harmful for plants as well. And they have excessive levels of plant available nutrients, or they can. Wood and bark chip mulch, they're not recommended in vegetable or annual flower beds. It's great around trees, shrubs, small fruits. They can reduce the need for irrigation by as much as 50%. Okay, so this survey is also going to be in the packet that you will get tomorrow in that email. We would really appreciate it if you would take this. CSU Extension is committed to providing access to programs and services for all of the residents of Boulder County, and your responses can help us ensure that we can continue to do that. The information that you provide in here is anonymous. It does ask for some demographics, but reports are created only in aggregate, meaning they don't know who you are. It's voluntary. We don't require you to supply the information, but we do hope you will. Having this information also is a way for us to continue to get funding for all these different programs. So again, if you have the time or the wherewithal to scan that QR code on your mobile phone, please do so. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm talking, but I'm muted. Not very helpful. Thank you so much, Patty, for all that great information.
Sure.
We are going to, that QR code will also be sent to you as well in tomorrow's email. All the participants will get that QR code as well. But let's go to the pre-submitted questions. I also got some questions in the Q&A. So let's go ahead and start with those. Jim, do you want to take a look at those too? So the first one I had was, when is it time or what temperature to speed up ripening of tomatoes and squash?
Okay, so the best time to speed up ripening of tomatoes and squash is going to be now. We probably have about 6 more weeks on average of frost-free weather. And it takes about 6 weeks for a tomato to mature from a blossom to a ripe tomato. there's really not much that you can do out in the garden. More sunlight as it's cold, as it gets colder would help, but I can't, imagine how to do that. So if you do have it covered, you could uncover it. But the ideal temperature actually to ripen, I know tomatoes are around 72 to 76 degrees. But what we recommend is whenever a tomato shows any sort of a color change, you can clip it at that point and bring it inside and put it on your counter in the kitchen, and it'll ripen up after that. So it's best that they ripen on the vine, but they're perfectly capable of ripening in your kitchen. So as long as it's hot like it is now and the nights are not overly cold, leave them on. And then as it gets towards that first frost date, around here, it's like the first week of September on average. I think last year we went into October. But keep your eye on the weather. And as long as it's going to be, say, 10 degrees above freezing, keep them out there. They'll eventually ripen. They tend not to ripen if it gets too hot. The lycopene in the tomatoes has to have enough temperature, but it can't have too much. So there's a Goldilocks zone for it. So if it gets super hot, they might stop ripening for a little bit, but they'll come back as the nights get colder and the days aren't quite as cold. Really nothing you could do about squash, but leave it on the vine as long as you can and just harvest it before the first frost.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Next question is how to collect and store tomato seeds for next year.
Oh, we just had a seed saving seminar on this. So tomatoes are something that you can, as long as the tomato fruit is ripe, fully ripe, you can harvest the tomato seeds out of that tomato. So what you want to do is take a fully ripe fruit, cut open the tomato, and then squeeze the juice from the tomato and the pulp into a sieve, and then get all of the water out of that sieve. From here, you could do your best to manually remove the seeds from the pulp that's left, and then dry them. The preferred method is to actually take them, put them in like a ball jar or something with a little bit of water, shake them up, leave them on the counter for about 3 or 4 days until they just start to ferment, and then repeat that cleaning process. That helps remove the gunk that's on the tomato from the tomato pulp away from the seed. And so if you do that ferment them and do that step, then you'll be able to run them through, clean them off with water, run them through a sieve, and then let them dry on the counter. Once they're completely dry, then you can store them. Best way to do that's airtight container, plastic bag, and in the garage, in the basement, or even in the refrigerator or the freezer, as long as they're completely dry.
All right, thank you. Here's an easy one. What does finished manure mean?
Finished manure is, animal waste that has been set outside to compost either with other material or itself. And it generally takes about a season to do that. So a full summer. And then basically what's happening is if it's left out, the rain and even the snow and stuff, the melting snow will go through that manure and wash away all the salt. There's a ton of salts that are in manure, as you can imagine, fresh manure, and they will burn your plants. But after a while, after this manure gets washed with several, rain and snow and things, it'll take the salt out of the manure and into the ground, and then the manure will decompose as well. It gives it an opportunity to do that, and that gets rid of all the bacteria, the bad bacteria and stuff as it heats up, and the salt goes away. So basically, you want that manure. Don't put fresh manure. I mean, it just came out of the cow or whatever, but you want it to at least overwinter into spring, or ideally 1 year. So that's what finished manure is. Well composted.
All right, thanks, Jim. And a couple other questions in the Q&A. If you have heavy metals in your soil, how does that affect your perennials and tomatoes?
in general, heavy metals in your soil aren't going to impact ornamentals very much at all. And the tomatoes generally will not collect the heavy metals in the fruit. I think I think CU did some studies right after the Marshall fire here in Louisville, and found that they weren't that much of an issue. The root vegetables would probably something to be more concerned about. If the soil test has indicated that you have an unsafe level of heavy metals in your soil, I mean, my recommendation would be to grow nothing edible in it. But if it just says we found cadmium or we found this and that, but it's only slightly above the normal, you're probably perfectly safe. And by the way, there are a few plants, some types of grasses actually help take the heavy metal out of the soil, and then the grass grows just fine with it. But they take it up into the plant, and then you can chop it down, and that's one way, and then put it in the trash, and that's one way you can alleviate at least some of that. But definitely get a reliable soil test to tell you what the levels are and tell you whether they're safe or not.
So I'm guessing from that 7-year-old manure would probably be fine.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. Just to let one person know, it's like Jim's answers will be included in the recording as they are right now, unless they're part of the pre-submitted questions, which we actually haven't even gotten to yet. There was Genevieve had a question about regarding the pruning of bushes. Is the 10% rule advisable? For example, cutting out 10% of the mature portions each fall?
It's completely dependent on what the plant is, so I really can't answer that. Some plants do best by cutting them back completely to the soil, and some plants do best by pretty much leaving them alone, which would be probably the 10% rule would be fine for that. But it really is dependent on the plant. So if you look it up online, look it up at some of our fact sheets and stuff, we have a pretty nice and big pruning guide on our website. So that's what I would recommend doing, and just do it on a case-by-case basis, depending on what plant you have.
Okay. And it's my understanding CSU Extension, do you all offer any type of bulk compost or anything like that? No?
We do not, as an organization. That's done through the city or the counties.
Great. And that's true of most communities. I'll just say Resource Central does not have any composting, but many municipalities and counties do offer free compost at certain times of the year, usually the spring, when people are really
Yes.
in need of it.
Mhm.
We have someone who asked about if you use your own branches that have been cut on their own property, how do you make the mulch weed free? Or is that even possible?
I don't quite understand the question, because if you're cutting branches, which I assume are trees or woody plants, those aren't weeds, so it will be by definition weed free. If you're worried about seeds, if you chop them up and use them in mulch, and you're worried about seeds going into that mulch by blowing in or something like that, I can't think of any way to do it other than, if you're going to mulch it, you can cover mulch with like a tarp, and then nothing will get in there. In fact, I have a big mulch pile in back of my yard right now that has a tarp over it, and that would certainly alleviate any seeds from going in there. The other thing is, if you have a really good mulch pile going and the seeds are already in there, either through something other than branches that you threw in there or from the soil below, if you do a good job and do the compost right, you can get it hot enough that it'll kill the weed seeds as well. But that's all I got for you.
All right. People are answering their own questions out on your website. But we've got a couple other questions. Someone wants to know about keeping grasshoppers and squirrels from eating up all the veggies and fruit. They do have netting. This person has netting. So when would be the best time to install netting, or would you recommend that at all?
So grasshoppers are really have come into their their own and damaging things maybe over the last 3 or 4 weeks. They were pretty small before that, and then and the grasshopper population ebbs and flows year in and year out. It's totally dependent on what the spring is like, and there's certain conditions where they just explode, and there's certain conditions that they just don't do well at all. So right now, to me anyway, where I live, it seems kind of like a normal year. And now that I do have big grasshoppers chewing on things. So it would have been great if I could have had netting up, say about 4 weeks ago. But it's basically when you start noticing the grasshoppers, and they'll be small at first and then they'll get big. But if you haven't done it by the time they're really big, that would be too late. So I would say probably the first part of summer is when I would make sure it's up there. The same answer probably applies to squirrels, because squirrels mostly are going to go after fruits. So they're and mostly when they're ripe. And by fruits, I mean vegetable fruits as well as fruits. But they're not going to eat an unripe apple, for example, or they're not going to eat an unripe tomato. But they will go in when they start ripening up, and they'll beat you to it by about a day or two when you're ready to pick it. So before the fruit ripens is when you want to do it for the squirrels, and then probably the beginning of summer for grasshoppers.
Great, thank you. When is the best time to plant a fall cover crop, such as oats in a vegetable garden, and for fall cover crops?
Yeah, so fall, the best time to do it in fall in Boulder County, or down on the not in the mountains, but in the on the plains here, is going to be between mid-September and mid-October. So probably October 1st would be the best time to do it.
Great.
And we have an answer that was a written question, and I'm just going to defer to that when we get there. It has a link to a site that will tell you what to plant and when to plant it for cover crops.
Great. And will that also cover is it necessary to chop everything up before tilling in the spring?
It is best to do that, yes.
Okay. Great.
You don't have to, but it's going to be hard to plant things in there, depending on what you use as a cover crop.
Gotcha. How do you get rid of Japanese beetles? And if this is a link, we can definitely send them there.
Okay. I don't have it off the top of my head, but there is a pretty good fact sheet from our website at CSU Extension .edu. But the bottom line is there is some products that are relatively non-toxic to pollinators, to animals, to people, that are grub that get rid of grubs, and one of them's, I think, grub be gone or something like that. But look those up. Like I said, it's a very very benign chemical, and you want to put that on turf grass. And if you can, talk your neighbors into doing it too if you have a really bad Japanese beetle problem, because they're going to come from miles. They can come up to 1 to 2 miles away. So getting rid of them in your own, by the way, a quick aside here is that Japanese beetles come out around July. They're in only turf grass, so only your lawn or a park or something like that. Not in soil, not around trees, not around plants, only turf grass. They come out and then they eat all of your stuff like they're doing now for about 2 months, and then they'll disappear come mid-September to the beginning of October. But by then they have mated and they've laid eggs again in the turf grass. So the best time to do this grub stuff is right about now, because the grubs are young and they haven't burrowed really deep yet. And then in the spring, probably around June-ish timeframe, May-June timeframe, as they're coming up for the summer to come out of the soil, you can get them too. But they're more susceptible to the pesticide in the fall because they're much smaller. So about now would be a good time to do it. And then for the next say 3 weeks as well. Once they're on, there's not a lot of pesticides there that can get them. I personally just go through with soapy water and knock them off in the morning. They're very slow in the morning. They don't fly away. And so that's when it's best. And they all tend to clump together. So in the morning, just go through and just knock them into your cup of soapy water and they'll drown. That's the best, safest way to do it. There are there's a chemical that's organic called Bt Gallery, and it is it's a toxin from a bacteria. It doesn't impact any other animals at all, except scarab beetles, they're called, and of which a Japanese beetle is. And that's another thing that you could try. So that would be my recommendations for it.
But it's only for lawns, not for garden beds, correct?
So the BT Gallery is a liquid that you can apply to adult animals, and that's for wherever you find them. It will not hurt pollinators. It's something that they have to ingest, and then pollinators won't ingest it, so it'll just get the beetles. I don't know that it's that effective, but it's about the only thing you can do that's safe for pollinators and things. There's probably much more potent pesticides that you could use, but it's really difficult to use those safely.
Right, but unless you have turf nearby or lawn nearby, you don't have to treat your garden beds in and of themselves.
Right. Not with there's the grub be gone type stuff is a like a dry application in your lawn. And yeah, you do not do that on your garden. They do not go in your garden bed as grubs.
Great. So just
Elizabeth?
yes.
I'm sorry, but I can send you the link to information about Japanese beetles after the call is over. I'll email that to you.
Great. Yeah, there is a really good, we really do have a good paper on that.
Great. Yeah, you can, we'll include that information for everyone in that email. Patty will send it to me and I'll make sure it's included in that email.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The last one we have in this Q&A is, can poppy seeds overwinter well and come back, or is it best to collect and store? And know any tricks for an annual poppy bed?
Boy, I'm not a poppy expert, so it's going to be hard for me to answer that. I will say this, that there are different kinds of poppies, and I know that they're completely, how you handle them is completely different. There's a California poppy and then an Oriental poppy, and they are different. One of them you can reliably reseed. I believe many of them are perennial. So they come back from the original plant year in and year out, and they'll drop seeds. So I imagine that it could spread them that way. If it were me, just, I would do a bunch of research and figure this out. But my gut feeling is that I would collect the seeds because I know that I have good, healthy seeds. I can keep them dry over the winter and then set them out in the spring. So that's what I would do. But I think there's a good chance that maybe those seeds need to sit out in the winter, and I just don't know that.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim.
You bet.
Appreciate it. Can someone use compost if it has Russian thistle leaves in it? That's very specific.
Leaves, probably, definitely not roots, any sort of root material, because they reproduce vegetatively as well as from seed. So, and they're nasty. I've been fighting them for years. I've been fighting Russian thistle for years. So, but yeah, leaves are probably fine. They won't propagate from leaves, but they will propagate from root or potentially even stems or something. So I probably wouldn't chance it myself because it's really hard to get rid of it once it gets established.
Okay, thank you. So now to these pre-submitted questions. I'll go ahead and read them, and if Patty and Jim, if you feel like
Patty is going to handle these since she did most of the work. So I'm going to mute myself.
All right, Jim. Well, we'll keep you on the ready for the in case more questions come in.
Yeah.
We still got more than half an hour to get through the questions.
Awesome.
So Patty, I'll just go ahead and read them, and then if you feel like it's been answered, we can skip to the next one. So we have some on plant maintenance. When do I cut back the plants, the fall or later?
That is going to depend entirely on the type of plant. There are some perennials that if you cut them back in the fall, they'll have exposed stems. And when that happens, they're more prone to the damages caused by our drying winter winds, and that accelerates winter kill. If you do plan on cutting back perennials in the fall, wait until they're completely dormant.
Great. Okay. So the next one is, how do you know which plants to cut back?
That also depends on the type of plant that it is. And the best way to know when to prune a flowering shrub or tree is to ask yourself when it flowers. That's important because plants that flower on what they call new wood, which is flowers blooming on new growth that starts in the spring, can be pruned from late winter to early spring. You don't want to wait too late in the spring or you risk nipping off buds that have already been set. And a good example of this, and I do this every spring, is the butterfly bush and roses. And there are others. There are things that you can look up online your particular plant. Plants that flower on old wood, which is they bloom on growth from the previous year, they just continue to grow that way, should be pruned after they've bloomed. If you prune too late in the fall or too early in the spring, you can also risk cutting buds off that form on that growth. Some examples of those types of plants are spirea, Apache plume, and lilac. Now, clematis is a nice different animal. If you have clematis, you need to know which kind you have before you prune. The Clematis montana bloom early on last year's stems, so you want to prune those after they flower. If you have Clematis ex jackmanii and Clematis Ernest Markham hybrids bloom on the current year's growth, and those should be cut back in late spring. Flowering perennials like Giardia, which is blanket flower, and daylilies can be pruned in the fall.
Excellent. And so just a note to any people, any audience members who have purchased a garden in a box kit from Resource Central, all that information about each specific plant came with your plant and care guide when you picked up your garden. So if you're missing that, you can reach out to us at resourcecentral.org and click on the garden info at resourcecentral.org. That's our email. And you can get another copy. You can name the garden that you bought, or we can look it up for you. But all that information about how to maintain each plant throughout the year is in that packet. All right, the next one is, when is the best time and how to safely and successfully transplant perennials?
The best time to safely and successfully transplant perennials is in the spring or early fall. You don't want to do it in the summertime if at all possible, because our hot and pretty dry weather in the summertime is really about the worst time of year to move any plant, no matter what it is. If you do decide, one of the things that I have learned, if you're going to do it in the spring or even in the summer, if you're dividing something or you want to move the plant, dig the hole first. Don't pull it out of one spot and leave it set while you dig the hole. It's really important to get it in the ground as soon as possible to avoid shock, which generally occurs in plants. They may look a little sad after the first transplant, but take good loving care, make sure they're getting watered and all the right conditions. If you have perennials that need to be divided and transplanted, you should do that in the fall if they're spring blooming plants. If you have summer and fall blooming plants, you divide those in the spring before they begin to grow, and ideally as the growing points emerge.
Okay, great. And I just want to pop in because Roz had a question that I said we would get to, and I didn't get to it. So let's see. So a garden bed that has squeegee as mulch, should this person be adding compost to that bed and then add more squeegee in the spring, or just stick with the squeegee?
Okay, I actually started typing an answer to that, but I'll go ahead and just answer it live. It looks like they are using it as a mulch and not as a soil amendment. So if you're using it as a mulch, it's really difficult then to add compost on top of it. You can do that. Assuming that your plants are recommended, there's a thing that popped up. Squeegee is a inorganic mulch, if you will, or soil amendment. It's basically smaller than pea gravel. It's crushed granite, but it's really small. So it's used as a drainage material when adding to soil, and can also be used on especially xeric gardens as a mulch. So just think of like really small crushed pea gravel. At any rate, if you're using it as a mulch, it's really hard to add like a layer of compost and then more squeegee, because eventually you'll just end up with a lot of rocks in it. So I would recommend using compost tea to amend your soil, or you could use a very, very fine compost like worm castings, and that will work its way down and it'll eventually decompose, and then you'll be left with your squeegee still as your mulch. And the other option would be to move the squeegee away from individual plants, get whatever mulch you want to use in that area, and then you could either move it back over or just leave it. But that's how I would recommend that you do that.
Great. And
And
then,
then she asked another question about best time to plant sow seeds in the fall or the spring. And it is plant specific, so it's going to depend. If you're talking mostly about native plants, either way should work. But if you think about how it happens in the wild, they drop in the fall, they overwinter, and then they sprout in the spring. So I would do it in the fall as a generic answer to that. But but it will depend on the plant.
great. Great. Thank you. Thanks for your patience. Let's see. The next question. How do I not interfere with insects wintering in leaves and dead plants? I try not to clean up until the end of May and also leave seeds in dried flowers for the birds.
That's a great question. You want to try not to disturb the habitat area that your garden provides for these insects and birds by avoiding too much foot traffic. If you have paths, try to stick to those. Otherwise, you risk compacting your soil and disturbing your garden habitat. Compaction, for those who might not know it, is the hardening of soil due to continuous wheel or foot traffic. It squeezes the air from the soil particles, and wet soils are particularly prone to compaction. Organisms and animals that live in the soil are greatly affected by compaction. For example, earthworms cannot dig to find food to survive when the soil is compacted. They need it broken up. Also, something you can do is to remove any diseased plants and leave only healthy ones for these critters. Otherwise, you risk diseases that overwinter in the plants, and you should avoid use of pesticides that can harm overwintering insects.
Okay, now we'll move on to watering. Do plants need to be watered during winter?
Short answer is yes. Outdoor perennial plants should be watered at least monthly under dry weather conditions. Windy sites, if you get a lot of heavy winds crossing every which way across your property, they will result in faster drying of sods and require additional water, sods and plants. You want to water when the ground isn't frozen. A good rule of thumb is 40 degrees Fahrenheit or above during midday, so the water will have time to soak in before a possible freeze at night. Trees also need to be watered in the fall and winter, following those same guidelines. You want to water when the air temperatures are above 40 and apply water during midday. The watering rules are a little more involved when watering newly planted versus established plants. We have included in the pre-asked questions, a link to more information about fall and winter watering.
All right, let's move on to soil, compost, and mulching. How do I best prepare the soil for late summer perennial planting and protect the plants for the winter?
The soil that you have for late summer perennial planting is really no different than what you used earlier in the season. If your beds are already amended and composted, you shouldn't need to add anything. If you do, I would say probably some organic matter would work, or compost as a side dressing, as Jim explained it, where you move the mulch away and scatter some of that around the plant, because you're probably not going to want to tear up your entire garden to do an entire compost or amendment. That will allow this materials to soak in over the fall and winter. You want to try to plant your perennials when the temperature is still warm and the soil is still easily worked. So this is still a good time to do that. Once the temperatures drop and it gets harder and harder to dig the soil, it's probably going to have a hard time surviving, because they need time to get established, get their roots down in the ground. Definitely add mulch to your plants, especially if they're in a winter windy area.
Nice. All right. So what amendment do you recommend adding to soil before winter? And does it matter whether it's a low water, like a low water xeric landscape, or a more traditional non-native?
This soil amendments are a really complex topic. Routine applications of organic matter should be considered an essential component of gardening, though, and soil management. The organic matter is going to improve the water and nutrient holding capacity of coarse textured sandy soil, if you have that. And if you have really fine textured clayey soil, that organic matter helps to bind the clay particles into larger chunks, which is what keeps your tilth healthy, the plant soil structure. They're called aggregates. And they create porosity, a lot more porosity than in compacted soil, and that improves water infiltration and drainage and air infiltration, and it allows your roots to get deeper into the soil. I'm going to recommend, and I put in here that a soil test is extremely helpful when you're choosing amendments. Before you just start putting things in, it's generally safe to put in organic matter. But if you're worried that, say, you don't have enough nitrogen or phosphorus or something else, you really truly aren't going to know that. It's like luck of the draw. If you happen to put those things out, they might have been getting healthy from something else. So we really do recommend soil tests to see what's going on in your soil. When you get that soil test back, it gives you just excellent instructions and shows you what the levels are of every different particular mineral, or like nitrogen, phosphorus, that kind of thing. Tells you where you are and how to correct it if need be. And there's also information about that in the pre-questions as well.
Great.
You'll have the links to both of those.
Is fall the time to fertilize?
Okay, that's a good question too. They're all good questions, but this is a very popular question. We get this a lot in the fall. Most of our Colorado lawns are what you call cool season grasses, like Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass, or turf type fescue. And those are the types of lawns that will benefit the most from fall applications of fertilizer, usually in October or November. If you have a warm season grass like buffalo grass or blue grama, those should be fertilized in late June or July, when the most growth occurs for those types of grasses.
All right. And we have another question. Where and how do you get soil tests?
Soil testing. There is a laboratory. It's attached to CSU's Department of Science and Agriculture, called SPUR. It's a water plant and soil testing laboratory in Denver at the on the grounds of the National Western Stock Show. You can go to their website, which I've included in these Q&A, this pre-questionnaire, and it'll give you all the information about how to get the soil sample, the best way to do that, so that they'll have what they need to give you a good reading on it. It gives you a price list. It gives you the form that you need to fill out. Yeah, there's always a form to fill out. And it's very detailed, because it matters. If you're using that in a vegetable garden, they'll test for different things, and like, what are you planning on growing, and that all that kind of thing plays into it. So I have in the instructions in these pre-question the website to that testing lab. And you can you don't have to be fancy with collecting it in terms of any special type of jar or anything like that, you can use Ziploc bags, quart-sized Ziploc bags.
All right. So here's a question. I think you've kind of hit a little bit of this already, Patty. I would like
Mhm.
to know what to do in autumn to maximize my soil health next year.
You're going to get so tired of hearing this, but consider testing your soil. That soil test will recommend any amendments that you can add to increase your soil's health. You also should remove any dead plant material, and you all know that it should be that you should remove the diseased plants if there are any. Add an inch or two of organic material to the soil. That can be dry grass clippings, dry leaves, compost, or partially decomposed compost. You can leave that on the top of the soil or scratch it in on the top layer of soil so that it's mixed in there when you're ready for the spring. Um, if you're managing an annual ornamental or vegetable garden, you might want to consider planting a fall cover crop, which Jim talked about, usually mid-September to mid-October. And then you want to till it into the soil in the spring a few weeks before you want to plant.
Great. And what about perennials? Should someone fertilize their perennials now?
I'm going to have to say, you usually fertilize when things are if they're in a growing spurt, and I guess that would be my answer to perennials. They're probably slowing down about now. So I would say probably in the spring.
Okay. All right. So how do I mulch with tree wood chips without interfering with insects and birds wanting grubs?
That's really interesting just because, believe it or not, they're small, but they're mighty. And insects and birds are going to get to grubs even with wood chips laid down or other mulches, depending on how deeply you've mulched. But they manage to find a way. A thinner layer will just make it easier for them. A very thick layer will make it a little more difficult, but there's no reason not to use it.
All right. Let's see. Next one. Is it good to keep a layer of fallen leaves on the garden beds?
Okay, leaves on the garden beds. They can be added to garden beds as a source of organic matter. You can add 6 to 8 inches of leaves, but you should shred them or chop them up with your lawnmower before you add them in. Otherwise, they can get, just like I was talking about straw a little earlier, they can get really icky and get moldy and things like that aren't great for the soil. You can add them as mulch in the fall, and then they can be incorporated into the soil in the spring. They can be turned directly into the soil in the fall if they are munched up like that, crushed up with your lawnmower. So
And there is Patty and Jim have included using leaves in the landscape. So some garden notes that are part of this document that you'll be getting. Should I do anything special with my compost bins in winter when I leave for a few months?
I feel like I cheated here because Jim answered this one for me since he's the compost king. But here's what he had to say. You really don't need to do anything. As the temperature lowers and the compost dries out, decomposition will slow down and eventually stop for the season. It will pick back up in the spring as the temperature increases and it gets rehydrated. If you want to keep the decomposition going as long as possible into the winter, you can insulate around the bin. You can use straw, mulch, finished compost, or even man-made insulating materials like foil-backed bubble wrap. And weather permitting, turn the materials in the bin, which is, mixing them all up periodically, and give it a good soaking right before you leave. He recommends EcoCycle's guide on winter composting, and the link is in those same Q&A.
All right, let's get to some tomatoes. How do I successfully grow tomato starts indoors, and how big can they get? I couldn't get beyond first leaves. Oh,
That's sad. I feel bad for you. but there's hope, I think. Tomatoes are going to do best, as you have tried, indoors. If you start them indoors from 6 to 8 weeks before you want to plant them. You can check the seed packet. It's always a good idea to do that when you're starting seeds to put out in your garden later, because they give you all that information. And especially for a particular type of tomato, they may all say 6 to 8 weeks, but some of them may recommend that you start sooner, some later. It's a great resource, those seed packets. You want to plant them, and that's part of the counting back to know when you'll start them. So because you want to plant them as soon as the danger of frost is past. Don't get them, if you start the seeds indoors too early, you may have to or what they do call pot up to another size pot. And that's not earth shattering or hard to do, but you can plant it so they're ready pretty quickly. I highly recommend this recording on the CSU Extension website. It's called Plant Talk Colorado, and it's a recorded video called Seed Starting. It gives you all the basics about what materials, how often you need to water, the light that you need, all of those things that can play into why you're not getting past that first set of leaves.
All right.
That is in here too, that information.
Great. Wonderful. This year I put my tomatoes in very late because it was so cool and rainy. What can I do differently if we have another cool spring next year without stunting them from putting them in too early?
Okay, there are different ways to use frost protection techniques if you do plant earlier. There's a really handy thing called the wall of water that provides protection against mild frost and cooler temperatures. It looks odd, but who cares, because it can help save your plants. Those are available at most hardware stores that also sell gardening supplies. They'll know exactly what you mean if you ask for a wall of water. Basically, it warms the soil. It encases your tomato plant, and it's got tubes. It's made up of these plastic tubes, and you put water in those tubes, and that warms the soil and helps keep your plant nice and happy. You can also use black plastic mulch to help warm the soil. That's going to be especially important as cool soil temperatures can, as probably plenty of people know, I know, it inhibits early growth. You can also try coverings like blankets and sheets and floating row covers and space blankets and even Christmas lights. If you have a cover over your plants, they work, the little tiny ones. I have put information in the Q&A about that. An interesting thing to note too is that if you're planting in ground, it takes longer for your soil to warm up than if you're using raised beds. So that's something else you might want to consider, is using raised beds to grow your veggies. They still might need protection against the vagaries of our weather here in Colorado, but the soil is going to warm up faster, and that's going to give you a better chance of success. And this is something that you might want to consider as well. And I've been successful with this, that if you end up planting later than usual, go out and look for cultivars that are earlier producers. Like Early Girl is a really good tomato, and it provides and matures in 50 days or less. So take that into consideration as well. You can do research. Early Girl is one that I use all the time, and it tastes really good, but there are others, I'm sure, out there. So just look online for when these tomatoes produce.
All right. Are there things that I should be doing for container gardening that are different from in-ground gardens?
Absolutely. Yes. Unqualified, yes. There are so many things that are different between the two. Some are similar. I mean, obviously watering is similar, and putting them in the right space for sunshine or shade, things like that. But just some of the things, it's too much to cover in this, so I've included information, a plant talk and a garden notes from CSU. But some basic things are that you need to consider the container. Sounds simple, but there are different kinds of containers. Some are porous, some are not, which means they may need to be watered more often or not as much. But absolutely, whatever pot you buy, make sure there's a hole in the bottom for proper drainage. It might look like oh God, I have to have this pot, but unless you can somehow, drill a hole in it, and I know that's possible. I'm not doing that to be silly, but you can, if you have the right tools, put holes in the bottoms of pots. I will say I've done it. My husband has done it. The type of soil that you need in containers is different. It needs to be very porous. Fertilizing needs are different, watering and the types of plants that you choose, meaning simply that you want to make sure that they have similar needs. So don't combine plants that require full sun in the same pot with plants that need shade or part shade.
That makes sense. What
Yeah.
is a good winter kill cover crop? I don't want anything that would continually grow back in the spring.
Just a little bit about winter kill cover crops, in case nobody's ever heard of that. They are named for their natural termination. They will freeze in the winter time, and that ends their useful period. They offer a low maintenance option for gardeners. As they die off during the winter, they break down and become organic matter. They enrich the soil with valuable nutrients at the same time. They improve soil structure and fertility and set the stage for that great garden in the spring. Some species that fit well into that category are oats, field pea or winter pea, and tillage radish, which is also known as oilseed radish and forage radish. That also has information actually from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign about winter kill cover crops.
Very cool. Let's see, I have an area of really old iris and lilies that I'd like to completely get rid of. I dug out all the bulbs last fall just to see everything completely fill in again this spring. How do I get those iris and lilies completely out of there?
You may not like this answer, but the most effective way is either digging out and removing the rhizomes, because you may think you've gotten them all, but rhizomes spread. They go across, not down and deep. So they keep producing rhizomes and they can go out pretty far. So digging and removing the rhizomes is most effective in the late summer or early fall. And that would be after they finish blooming and the leaves are starting to decline. And a way to do that is to loosen the soil around the rhizomes with a spade or a garden fork. And you want to try not to pierce the rhizomes, because that can go, oh yeah, let's grow some more. You want to remove as much of the rhizome system as possible to prevent regrowth. Remove the roots and any other plant parts, because fragments can sprout new plants as well. Don't compost the rhizomes. They may regrow. You can put them in city compost if you want, but they're not going to be killed in your compost bin. Just bag them up and dispose of them in the trash or city. Monitor for regrowth, because they can grow back and you want to make sure that you're on top of this. The other way is to starve them and keep them from getting their nutrients by repeated cutting. You will weaken the plant if you repeatedly cut back any new growth that appears throughout the season. And ideally, you'll cut that growth back as closely to the soil line as possible, because they won't have those leaves to feed on. That will eventually deplete the energy in the rhizome and eventually will kill the plant. Lilies, not much different. Some grow from bulbs and some grow from rhizomes. If they grow from rhizomes, just follow the same suggestions that are for iris. And if they're from bulbs, these are some things that you can try. Digging and disposal. Manually dig out the bulbs. Again, it's crucial to remove all the bulb and any remaining stem or root fragments. Sift the soil, because that can help you find smaller bulbs that you might otherwise miss. We've all seen those. They can be really tiny. And to prevent their spread, dispose of all the removed plant material in the trash or landfill. Not another one that you want to compost. And the same thing about repeated cutting. You can weaken it. You keep cutting back any new growth that appears and cut it back as low as you can. So it's going to slowly starve that bulb out. It'll eventually deplete the energy and it will kill the plant. And they're both very effective if you have the patience and the time to work on that. I have to mention that herbicides are another option for both types of plants, but if you choose this option, yes, the results are generally quicker than other methods, but it will depend on the herbicide you choose and the type of plant. Public service announcement. Always read the label of any product you're considering for information on how to use the product, when, where, and if it's meant to kill the plant in question. You're not doing a bit of good if you just, pick up a product that doesn't mention iris or lily on the bottle, or dry herbicide if they have those. There's also safety and environmental information and more on those labels. You really, really want to pay attention to it. As we say in the extension, the label is the law.
Oh, there we go. We are just at the end of time. It's 7:57.
Oh, wow.
And we got through all of the pre-submitted questions. Looks like I don't see any unanswered questions. So good job to Patty and Jim. I want to thank both of you for all this excellent information. Jim and Patty, I hope you all learned as much as I did and feel empowered to start using these methods in your landscape this year.